something sort of, more kind of emotional about those sorts of races and the idea that Black women are moving into these positions of power that they haven't previously held.
Absolutely, absolutely. There's definitely a strong emotional tie to this work and to the success. I think coming out of the Virginia election in November, when we saw the huge numbers of Black women who went to the polls and the difference that their votes made in that very close race. I think it really showed Black women across the country, like, we can do some things, we can really make a difference. And when we're at the table, we know that our voices are being heard. And for our nation's history, unfortunately, the voices of Black women have been marginalized and, more times than not, completely erased from the story. So to be able to stand up very publicly at these venues, whether they're in Congress or leading city halls or in state legislatures, and say, I am here and you cannot erase me, I think there is great pride and energy behind that. And I think it is one of the really compelling factors that has led to Black women's success all across the country.
My own congresswoman is a Black woman. I live on the south side of Chicago, and my congresswoman is Robin Kelly, who is
Oh, love
absolutely
Robin.
fantastic. And I am so thrilled that she represents my district. So I feel quite fortunate that I live in a place where we are supportive of Black women running for office.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the things you might suggest for those of us who ourselves are not Black women, who want to be very supportive of people in these races, who want to be supportive in general of Black women, being able to harness their political capital? What are the sorts of things? I assume donating money is always a
Mm-hmm.
good thing. Where is the money best spent? What are other ways that we can be helping in this effort?
Yeah, I think money is a huge piece of it, giving the money directly to candidates so that they can determine the best way to deploy those resources to get their message across to their voters, I think is hugely important. I think also supporting organizations like Higher Heights and many of our sister organizations who are working to build this pipeline and support the political ladder for so many Black women, because we know that we need to increase the engagement. We're not where we need to be on a national standard for Black women in particular, but there's so much work to be done, and putting the resources in a very deliberate long-term strategy to fund a long-term strategy really will make a difference. I think historically, organizations and candidates have generally not gotten the resources that they needed until the 11th hour. And at that point in time, it's almost too late to really be able to turn those resources into success stories. So I think that is definitely a big piece of the puzzle, but I think also just as important is demanding more reflective democracy. So when there are opportunities to, nominate, when there's an opening, look to see who else is in the mix, who else could step into these shoes, because so often power brokers, gatekeepers look at the same usual suspects as potential next leaders, but thinking outside the box, or who are the people who have been in the trenches, who are leading these groups, who are doing the grassroots work? What about pulling them in? Or what about the people who've been advising from the side, who may not look like the white male stereotype of an elected leader, and really demanding that everyone look beyond the obvious to really tap into the full potential that is out there. So I think demanding more choices, more variety of choices, and supporting those women when they step out there is, just tremendously important in being able to have success.
Do you have any suggestions for ways we can talk to our children about this sort of idea of representational democracy? I have two sons, two white boys, and I want to make sure that they are considering these things as they grow up. How can they best support women, Black women who are running for office, how can they best support their friends and eventually their colleagues in thinking about positions of leadership. So do you have any recommendations for how we might talk to them even now, even while they're very young children, about these sorts of ideas?
Yeah, I think talking to children is so critically important. My daughter is 10, and in her mind, she's like, why wouldn't I be able to do whatever I have the capabilities to do? Why would somebody automatically think that I can't?
Mm-hmm.
And I think children in general come at this from that position. And I think reinforcing that narrative of anyone can do anything, it has nothing to do with whether or not there's nothing that boys are better at doing than girls. There's nothing that Black people are worse at doing than white people, or just keeping that narrative that all people are equal and equally capable, and that it is important to have, to use my daughter's, the framing that they send us home from school when they're talking about what they should eat and teaching them nutrition, is have a colorful plate. Have a colorful decision making table, because when you have a whole bunch of colors, generally it tastes better. And using scenarios like that they can really understand. Or you don't want to necessarily have all blue Legos. What if you had a variety of colors of Legos? Think of all the things that you could do and how great it would be. And thinking of leadership in that same vein, that variety is good and important, and diversity is something that should be embraced, and no one should be shut out because they don't fit someone else's cookie cutter of what leadership looks like, I think is something that we just have to constantly, I think it's incumbent on us as adults to demystify ourselves or deprogram ourselves, because that's where we come from, and the children learn that. So it's almost, we need to take a step and learn from our children and leave a lot of those preconceived notions behind.
And I saw that you've recently won a Roddenberry Fellowship for 2018, so congratulations on that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Could you tell us a little bit about what that is and the kind of work you hope to do with that?
So the Roddenberry Fellowship is really just a remarkable opportunity to support leaders who are doing this work but not nearly at capacity, or have necessarily fleshed out the full plan of how they can be impactful. It's really an amazing honor to be selected with this amazing group of people who are really looking to try and change the world. So the four kind of sectors that the program is looking to support are civil rights, women's rights, environmental justice, and LGBTQ rights and access. So, it's an amazing group of individuals. There's 20 of us from all over the country that fall into these four buckets, or in multiple buckets, as there is, plenty of overlap in this work. And, it's really providing much needed headspace to really think through how we can be more impactful. And they have an amazing set of mentors and a support system to really help us, challenge us to be better leaders and be more impactful with our work to make this nation a better place. So my project for the fellowship is taking our existing sister-to-sister salon conversations, where we have used them to really talk through Black women's political empowerment, and really focus it on the act of voting and civic engagement through the ballot box, and quantify the impact of our one-on-one in-person conversations. We've done a lot of this work in the past, over the last 4 years, online, and not necessarily face-to-face. So taking this model of having these sister-to-sister salon conversations, where we bring together small groups of Black women to talk about the challenges and opportunities to expand their civic engagement, and doing that in person and getting a read on people, how do you feel about voting? Are you a regular voter? Before they have this conversation, and then after the 2-hour conversation and dialogue amongst themselves, what are your feelings coming out of that? And then how does that translate into your actions at the polls? Do you go and you vote early? Do you bring people with you? Are you more inclined to talk to your friends and colleagues about the importance of voting, having had this conversation, and how can we use those numbers and that modeling to increase Black women's civic engagement even more? Because we are already one of the strongest performing demographic groups at the polls, but there's still many women who are not registered, who should be registered, or who are registered but don't vote on a regular basis. So how do we move all of those women through the process to increase their civic engagement and civic impact overall?
That's great. I'm so excited about this idea of greater civic engagement in general. I think, if anything good is going to come out of the Trump election, it's going to be this sort of awakening of everybody that we need to really be engaged all the time, not just
Yeah,
every 4 years.
exactly.
Yes, that's great. And for any of our listeners who don't know, the Roddenberry Fellowship comes from the Roddenberry Foundation, which was started by Gene Roddenberry's son, Rod Roddenberry. My husband is a huge Star Trek fan, and so we've been, sort of teaching our children about inclusion and diversity through Star Trek,
Mm-hmm.
among
Yes,
other ways.
yes,
So Star Trek has been
yes.
really important in our idea of sort of the ideal vision of the future.
Yeah, I mean, Gene Roddenberry was such a visionary when he came up with Star Trek and what that has meant to generations of people and how they view the world is really amazing. And to then take his legacy and use it to try and build the community that he envisioned through Star Trek and in real life it's a great honor to be part of that process.
That's really exciting. I'm so glad to hear about the Roddenberry Fellowship and what you're planning to do with it. Is there anything else that you want to be sure that our listeners think about in terms of what Higher Heights is doing, or more generally about the political engagement of Black women?
I think parting words would be that, Black women have been doing this work at the voting booth and now more so out on the ballot for generations because our lives depended on it. And we're not going away. So, continue to support and build, and it will make for a better democracy, a more reflective democracy, a more inclusive democracy. Something that will not just benefit Black women, their families, and their communities, but the nation overall.
And we will put on our website a link to your Facebook page and your website and your Twitter feed. So I hope that people will follow those, especially to see when you do make endorsements, ways that we can help those candidates.
Great. Fantastic.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on. This has been a really great conversation.
Great. Thank you so much for having me.
Our theme music is called Sweeter Vermouth and was composed by Kevin MacLeod of Incompetech.com. It is licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 3.0 license. Our logo was created by Matthew Weflin, expressly for Two Broads Talking Politics, and is copyright 2017. You can contact us at twobroadstalkingpolitics@gmail.com or at twobroadstalk on Twitter. Our podcast can be found on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and TuneIn. Please let us know if you have any trouble finding us.